Nice, relaxed, third service. This feels good. I feel like I can breathe. This is nice. Real good. So, hey, thank you, Megan, for that. Love the opportunity for the ladies. You know, our theme this year is whatever it takes, servants and stewards. So, love that the ladies' Christmas party, if you will, has a serving component to it. So, you guys are gathering items for the clothing closet, and for my dudes yesterday who came out to our serve day, thank you. That was such a good day. Awesome to get out there. A lot of guys going out serving in a bunch of different places, so really, really cool. Hey, if you got a Bible, we are finishing out a story that we started 9 weeks ago, and every time I finish a story, it is both like yay and really sad at the same time. And this is one of those stories that I wrestled with a lot trying to figure out how to close this story, because it is a story within a story within a story. And as I was preparing, I had like different messages. At one point, I had 3 mini sermons to give today within one sermon. Ultimately, we're going to land on 2 sermons today within a story. The first one is the majority of it. The second one will be like 2 minutes long. But we're looking at the closing of the life of Joseph, which is obviously significant. And then as this story ends, it's the part of the bigger story, and that's a story that God's moving throughout multiple books, right? In other words, the entire story of God. So a story that starts with Joseph's great-grandfather is one ultimately that gets carried on past Joseph. And so to just look at Joseph's story doesn't make a whole lot of sense because there's something bigger going on. So we're going to look at both today. So 2 sermons. I don't normally title my sermons, but I got a nice little title for you, for those of you who like to take neat and tidy notes. The first one is The Weight of Unresolved Guilt. The second one, The Hope of an Unresolved Promise. So for my friends who have not been with us this whole time, we've been studying the life of Joseph, and Joseph's life is an interesting life because it starts out with a family who truly does love the Lord. Like we got to make that clear. We got to make that up front. This family loves the Lord. And there's a ton of brokenness in this family, right? There's a lot of dysfunction. There's abuse. There is step-parents. There's murder. There's neglect. There's abandonment. Like there's all the things in a family that cause a lot of pain that a lot of us are familiar with in different levels, some more than others. But I just want us to remember that this isn't just a family that's not trying to follow the Lord, that's just out there. Like, this is a family that's showing up to church, right? This is a family that's in a community group. This is a family that's like, we're trying to do the things, and there's still a ton of hurt and pain in the midst of it all, right? So Joseph has this family, and at the age of 17, you know, a lot of you remember this, he was sold by his brothers, which again those are words that easily come out. They're easy to say, hard to put yourself there. Right? Hard to imagine what it would be like to be trafficked, to be sold into slavery, to really be given a death sentence from your brothers. Like, we don't want anything to do with you forever. We are erasing you from our family. Like, that is some deep pain. And so for 17 years, Joseph is living in actually for 13 years. He's living in a lot of pain. He's living in slavery. He's just like, man, it's hard. He's on his own. His brothers, they're not in the picture anymore. But through this, we see this moment where Joseph is able to forgive. Right? He's able to forgive his brothers for the pain that they caused. He's able to kind of say, hey, I forgive you and move on. I'm not going to try to take vengeance towards you. I'm kind of doing my own thing. And then he gets freed, right? And so he starts his own life. He starts a new life again, and now he's in a position of power. He's in a position of prominence, and he still hasn't reconciled with his family. He's doing his own thing. He gets married. He has kids. He's living 300 miles from where he grew up, and he's not trying to reconcile with his family at this point. He's just like, you guys are fine over there. You can live in Arizona. I'm living in Oregon, and we're not going to call. We're not going to text. I'm just living my life. That happens for a long time. He's not sure he wants to bring him back into life, and he's just doing his own thing. And then 20 years after this initial kind of moment where they sell him into slavery, Joseph is reunited with his brothers. We saw last week he has a moment where he gets to decide, what do I want to do? Do I want to pursue reconciliation? Is this even a good idea? Do I want you back in my life? Is this safe? Like, are you going to hurt me? You going to hurt my wife? You going to try to hurt my kids? Like, whether you do it on purpose, whether it's just like it's incidentally going to happen because, maybe you're going to do something and, man, it's going to cause all kinds of problems. And so he kind of goes through this process that we looked at last week over a year's worth of time where he asks the question, can I trust you? Like, you really hurt me 20 years ago. Can I let you back into my life? And are you a changed person, or are you going to try to hurt me again? And we see ultimately through a year-long process, through a bunch of these, what the text titles as tests, we see that the brothers really have changed, which is really hopeful, right? It's hopeful for those of us who've gone through something like that, knowing like, hey, it's possible for people to change. And his brothers radically changed. They go from the place where they take Joseph, who is innocent, they sell him into slavery, so they go from that moment to the, hey, we're going to take our brother who is guilty, who at least seems like he's guilty, and I'm willing to put myself in his place so that he can go free. So they really did a 180. And it's at that moment that Joseph goes, man, I can let you back into my life. And we have this really sweet uniting of this family again. 20 years of one in Arizona and one in Oregon, and we're back together. And it's just like, man, I miss you. What's it like? Like you've got kids? That's amazing. Hey, here's my kids. And it's just this like really cool moment. And then Pharaoh gets involved and he sees the uniting of the families. And he's like, this is so great. Let's bring everyone up to Egypt. Like, you're down in Canaan. Let's bring everyone back up. And he's so pumped and everyone comes back up. And it's just this great moment. And that's kind of where we ended the text last week. And then the story continues. Right in chapter 46, 47, 48, 49, we see a couple of different things happen. I'll summarize some of it a little bit later, but one of the main things that happens is that Joseph's dad, Jacob, he pronounces blessing over all the kids. And it's kind of an interesting section. It's a weird section because we don't really operate in that mode very often today. But basically, God gives Grandpa a word, and Grandpa pronounces this word over each of the kids. And he's kind of saying, hey, here's what's going to happen in your future. And in some of those moments, you're like, dude, that's awesome. And some moments you're like, really? That seems really unfair. But God knows what he's doing, so okay. So then at the end of all that, at the end of chapter 49, Dad dies. Right? So Grandpa dies. Jacob is dead. And this is where we're going to pick up our story here for the first sermon, the weight of unresolved guilt. As chapter 50 begins, we're going to see a funeral. And this is a long funeral. It's one that's lasted about 70 days. This is all of Joseph's family. It's his brothers. It's their spouses, their kids, a bunch of Egyptians. They're mourning for 70 days. And then they make the pilgrimage back down to Canaan, right? So they make a 300-mile journey from Egypt back down to Canaan to bury Grandpa. And on the way back, they get back home, and it's when they are back home that we finally pick up our text today as we enter the last words of the 50th chapter of Genesis. So if you would, follow along with me as we read chapter 50, starting in verse 15. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, it may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for all the evil that we did to him. So they sent a message to Joseph saying, your father gave this command before he died. Say to Joseph, please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin, because they did evil to you. And now please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father. Joseph wept when they spoke to him. His brothers also came and fell down before him and said, behold, we are your servants. As we hear the words of Joseph's brothers coming back after this funeral, the kind of idea that comes to mind is sometimes the hardest people to forgive are ourselves. We've been talking a lot about forgiveness through the story of Joseph. And today we're going to see a moment here where the brothers, 17 years after they've been united, 17 years. Okay, 17 years of birthday parties together, 17 years of going to kindergarten graduation and middle school parties, and 17 years of figuring out who's getting married and how are we going to throw the thing, 17 years of Thanksgivings together. 17 years later, Joseph's going to realize these brothers haven't forgiven themselves. He's going to see this moment that they're living in fear, in angst, in worry, that Joseph wants to take revenge on them. 17 years is a very long time. And why now? Right? Why does this come up 17 years later? The truth is we don't know exactly why, but we can imagine a few reasons why these thoughts would be conjured up right now. Think about this. Think about the fact that they just took their entire family, and for the first time that we know of in 17 years, they went back to the homeland. Right? So what does that mean? It means we're revisiting all the places where all the trauma and all the hardship happened, right? So for the first time, here's Joseph and his brothers going back home. Now, I don't know what that looked like, but you can imagine a few things, right? You can imagine passing the school that you guys grew up going to, and it was at that school that the brothers would always say, hey, let's leave Joseph and let him walk home by himself. So here he is, a favorite little brother. Maybe big brothers always left him. Right? Maybe you pass the schoolyard where one of your brothers beat you up for the first time. Right? Maybe you pass the little corner market where the brothers used to steal beef jerky and soda and then blame it on you. Right? Maybe mom and dad were getting mad at you. Right? Far worse, maybe you pass the place where they threw Joseph into a hole. Right? And Joseph's got these feelings, man. Maybe the brothers had these feelings. Right? Maybe the brothers passed the place where they bound Joseph. Maybe they passed the place where they beat him unconscious. Right? Maybe they passed the place where for years after the fact, they used to sit under a certain tree and go, man, I wonder what happened to my brother. Now, I don't know. I don't know if any of that's true. But I know that going back to a place where you experience hardship and trauma has to conjure up a lot of feelings. Right? We know something for certain is true in this story. We know that dad, when he was alive, he offered some sort of semblance of unity and protection because it's after dad dies that the brothers are really concerned. They're going, dad's not here to protect us. Dad's not here. Maybe Joseph's been waiting these 17 years. And they feel it. And it's in this moment that they kind of make up this story, right? Joseph knows it's a stupid story. He's like, this is ridiculous. If my dad really wanted this to happen, he would have told me, obviously. But they make up this story. Joseph, your dad, like right before he died, he really wanted you to hear this message. Like, this is really, really important. Whatever happens, you just have to forgive your brothers. I know they did harm to you, but man, for the rest of my life, I will be turning over in my grave forever if you don't forgive them. Right? And he's actually pretty sad to hear them say this. And you got to wonder, well, why is he sad? I think he's sad for two reasons. Number one, like he feels bad for them because they're living with this unresolved guilt. Like, you ever forgiven someone and years later they're still worried about it when you're not? Right? You feel bad for them. You're like, wait, what? Like, I've forgiven you a long time ago. So I think Joseph has some of those feelings. But then I also think there's a part of Joseph that he's going like, man, haven't I shown you? Like, don't you trust me? Like, I feel like I've done everything possible to show you that I've fully forgiven you. Like, why do you doubt me? So I think there's a couple of things going on there, and he just feels awful for his brothers. Like, you don't need to live in this guilt. Like, forgive yourself. I've forgiven you a long time ago. So we see that Joseph is just absolutely brokenhearted at his brother's response. The story continues. And we watch the brothers, and in this response to them, to Joseph, we see that the brothers, they actually try to punish themselves, right? Which at first sounds strange until we start to think about how do we respond when we don't forgive ourselves, right? Very often we try to punish ourselves, right? We see this in verse 18. The brothers also came and fell down before him and said, behold, we are your servants. Right? When you and I can't forgive ourselves, we often punish ourselves. Right? We do this in a lot of different ways. It can start with self-talk. We say things to ourselves like, man, you're awful. why did you do this? Right? Why would anyone want to be around you? Like, why did you make this mistake? Why did you actively choose this decision? Right? And we start saying things to ourselves like, well, why would anyone want to be my friend? Why would anyone want to get to know me if they knew what was going on here? And so we do things to ourselves to punish ourselves if we haven't actually forgiven ourselves. Sometimes this comes out in just overcorrection in life. Sometimes this comes out in just like, well, I know that I feel guilty over here, so I'm going to overcompensate by like trying to be really, really good now. Right? So maybe, you're raising kids and you're just like, I feel like I failed as a parent for my kids as they were growing up. So now that I have grandkids, I'm just going to triple down and I'm just going to be the best grandparent ever. And maybe it's not coming from a place of health, and maybe it's coming from a place of like, I'm trying to make up for things I did in the past. Right? Maybe it comes out in different ways like, well, I'm just going to work really hard, or I'm going to play really hard and just try to avoid thinking about the things that I've done in the past. Right? So I'm just going to distract myself and not actually deal with the fact that I haven't truly forgiven myself. Oftentimes it can manifest itself in more cruel, dark ways, right? Self-harm, right? Suicidal thoughts, like I haven't forgiven myself, so I just want to end life. Right? There's a lot of different ways that when we don't forgive ourselves, these feelings come out. Side note, if you've never had any of those thoughts, you probably should mourn over your sin a little bit more. Right? Some of you are like, I have no idea what you're talking about, Pastor Josh. Like, that's a thing. Right? We're called to mourn. Like, mourn over our brokenness. But we're also called to recognize that we've been forgiven and we need to live out of that forgiveness. So Joseph responds to them. Let's bring it back to Joseph. These brothers, they're like, hey, we need to punish ourselves. Put the chains on right now. We'll be your slaves. Joseph's brokenhearted, verse 19 says this, but Joseph said to them, do not fear. I love that. He just recognized, do not fear, for am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So do not fear. I will provide for you and your little ones. Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Right? Joseph does three things in recognizing their response and recognizing like, man, my brothers are really hurt. They can't seem to forgive themselves. So the first thing that he does is he acknowledges what they did was wrong. Right? Sometimes if we've lived in a moment where, we can't forgive ourselves, it seems like maybe it's because other people aren't talking about it and we haven't processed it. So Joseph just says it. He's like, yeah, what you did was wrong. It was really hurtful and it wasn't an accident. Like you did something intentionally on purpose. You tried to do something you did something that was evil. He just labels it, which I think helps the brothers to process. They go like, yeah, he recognizes how bad this was. And then the second thing he does, he reaffirms his forgiveness. And he recognizes his position. He goes, I forgive you, and I'm not God. Which means I don't get to take vengeance on you because vengeance is not my responsibility. It's not my authority. I release all ability to try to take back what you took from me. Like that's the Lord's. Then he does something beautiful. He has a heart of restoration for his brothers. He clearly deeply cares about them, even though they've hurt him. And he says, hey, here's the path to be able to forgive yourself. And this is for you and I as much as it is for them. The only way that you and I will ever learn to truly forgive ourselves is if we stop looking at our story and we start looking at God's story, right? We stop looking at the pain that we've caused and we start looking at, well, what did God actually do through it, right? Picking it up in verse 20. Joseph says, but as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. He's using the very words that he spoke 17 years ago. Right, last week, if we were to pick up the very next words that we finished our sermon on, the very next words we read 17 years ago would have been this, from chapter 45, verse 4. So Joseph said to his brothers, this is immediately after he reveals himself to them. Right, so immediately after he's like, I'm your brother, this is what he says. He says, come near to me, please. And they came near. And he said, I am your brother, Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves. Right? One of the hardest things that we can do, don't be distressed at yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh and Lord of all his house, the ruler over all the land of Egypt. Here's Joseph. He's saying to his brothers, he goes, yeah, you did something really wrong. And you can look at that for the rest of your life and beat yourself up over and over and over and over, but I want you to stop looking at that story. And I want you to look at this story over here. This story that God was working through all the horrible things that you've done, through all the horrible things that have been done to me, and look what God's done. See, one of the coolest truths is in the first book of the Bible, there's 2 parallel stories that are happening. Right? This is not a mistake that at the climax of the very first book, Joseph says these words, right? Because there's one story that says, here's what's happening on the human level. It's a messy story, right? In this family that loves God, like there is layers and layers of hurt and pain and brokenness that go really, really deep. And it gets worse, right? Just follow me for a minute. We know all the pain that's already happened in Joseph's life. Well, if you're to read the rest of the book today, or this week, I would encourage you to do it. Chapter 47, like if you've read it before, you remember, here's what happens to Joseph. Like he's supposed to be a blessing to all of Egypt. I think this might be a section that he looks back on and goes like, yeah, I don't know if I was a blessing to everyone. Right? So let's remember what he does. He taxes everyone 20% to collect all this food so that there'd be food when the famine comes for 7 years. So he charges everyone 20% of their food. He stores it all. And then does he freely give it back to the people because they gave it to him? No. Like any good government, he abuses them twice. Right? He takes it on the front end and he sells it back to them. Right? So what does he do? He says, oh, you want food? Come buy it back for me. They run out of money. What does he do? He says, oh, give me all your animals. Right? They run out of animals. What does he do? Give me all your land. They give him all land. They run out of animals. They run out of food. They run out of land. Then what does he do? Give me yourselves. And everyone becomes enslaved. Right? Everyone. On top of that, listen to this. It's Chapter 47, verse 20, this is describing like how awful it is. So Joseph bought all the land, all of it, of Egypt for Pharaoh. For all the Egyptians sold their fields because the famine was severe on them. The land became Pharaoh's. As for the people, he made servants of them from one end of Egypt to the other. Right? Plot twist. Maybe Joseph did have a chapter in his story where he goes, maybe would have replayed that one differently, right? Which leads to what? Right? What does it lead to? It leads to, well, follow this out. Joseph has everyone enslaved except for who? Except for his family. Right? What happens to his family? They're living in Goshen. Like his whole family moves up from Canaan to Egypt. They're given the best of the land, and they're provided all of the king's food for nothing. Right? Do you think that's going to cause some resentment between all of the Egyptians and the Hebrews? Yeah, just turn the page to Exodus chapter 1 and find out how much resentment's really going on there. Like it's significant, right? 400 years of slavery. Like Joseph had some part to play in that, I think, right? All that being said, this is the story that's going on over here. Now, Joseph and his brothers easily could look at this story and go, man, I don't know if I can forgive myself. I caused a lot of pain. A lot of people cuss my name going to bed for years and years and years and years, and I can dwell on this, and I can live in all kinds of just angst, and just that can be my life, or I can look at this other story over here. And what's the other story over here? Right? We started looking at this a couple weeks ago when we opened up Psalm chapter 105. Right? This is written hundreds of years later. But listen to the other story over here, and Joseph has already alluded to this multiple times. Look what God is doing, right? You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good, right? Psalm 105, starting in verse 16. when he's speaking about God, when God summoned a famine on the land and broke all supply of bread, God, verse 17, he sent a man ahead of them, Joseph, who was sold as a slave. His feet were hurt with fetters, his neck was put in a collar of iron, until what he said came to pass. The word of the Lord tested him. The king sent and released him. The ruler of the people set him free. He made him lord of his house, the ruler of all his possessions, to bind his princes at his pleasure and to teach his elders wisdom. Right? And then here's what happens next. Then Israel, so that's Jacob, that's his family, came up to Egypt. Jacob sojourned in the land of Ham, and the Lord made his people very fruitful. How? By taking advantage of everything that Joseph did to the people of Egypt. And God made them stronger than their foes. And then look at this, verse 25. God, he turned the hearts to hate his people. God's saying, hey, I'm going to take Egypt and I'm going to make them hate you to deal craftily with his servants. So God takes Joseph to Egypt in chains. God sends a famine. God makes Egypt hate the Hebrews. Ultimately, God enslaves the Hebrews and God frees them all at his goodwill. That's a great parallel story. But wait a second. I thought this was happening at the same time. Yeah, it was. So if I'm going to be able to live and forgive myself, I have to look at not just what I did, but what God did. I think about a good friend of mine. A number of years ago, a good friend of mine was married. She got married right out of college. She was married for about 5 years, and one day her husband he just left. No idea that there was problems in the marriage, just left. And this devastated my friend, obviously. She's a believer and just trying to figure out, man, what happened? Did I do things wrong? What could I have done differently? And then obviously trying to figure out, how do I rebuild my life? What does that look like? I'm sure there's feelings of shame and guilt and just questions man, what do I do? A couple years later, she meets a new guy, and they want to get married and trying to figure out, is this the right thing? Is this good? And not everyone in the family agreed that this is right or good. Some people didn't come to the wedding because they thought, maybe this isn't right. That good friend is my mom. 44 years later, after being married to my dad, I'm sitting here pretty happy that happened to her. Right? I'm sitting here going well, I'm alive because of it. My kids are alive because of it. Now my mom has a choice. Right? She can look back and go, man, what happened all those years ago? How could I have done this differently? Why did this happen? Why did my ex-husband do this? Right? And there can be feelings of pain, hurt, anger, frustration, all the things. She can dwell on that. Or my mom can say, God, thank you that you forgive and you restore, and thank you that you work through all levels of brokenness, and look at where I am today. I can look at that and go, man, thank you that you worked through that, and I'm here today. We've got a choice. We can choose to focus on the brokenness of our story and live in unresolved guilt, or we can choose to focus on God's victorious story, that he is working all things together for good, all pain, things that you've done, things that have been done to you. Right? Now, in order to do this, here's where we're going to get into our second sermon. Don't worry, it's about 2 minutes long. Sometimes we have to hold on to a promise that's unfulfilled. Right? In order to fully forgive ourselves, sometimes we have to hold on to hope that we do not see. Right? Because as the story of Joseph ends, Joseph has to hold on to a promise that God really does know what he's doing. Right? The story of Joseph ends, and it ends with these words, starting in verse 22. These are the final words of the book of Genesis, the final words in the story of Joseph's life. So Joseph remained in Egypt, he and his father's house. Joseph lived 110 years, and Joseph saw Ephraim's children to the third generation. The children also of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were counted as Joseph's own. And Joseph said to his brothers, he's declaring a promise that God made to his great-grandfather. okay? His great-grandfather, Abraham. He says to his brothers, guys, I'm about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. So here's Joseph saying, God's made me a promise. He's made my great-grandfather a promise that he's not done, that he's going to do a work here, even if I don't see it. And Joseph goes to the grave, never seeing the promise fulfilled that God made to his great-grandfather, even though he holds on to this promise. Right, verse 25, then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will surely visit you. Right? How does he know that? Because he believes the promises of God. And you shall carry up my bones from here. And Joseph died being 110 years old. They embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. Right? We get the perspective hundreds of years later, where we can read, and in a few minutes we can go, 400 years later, they're done with slavery, and look, they actually bring Joseph back. And this promise that God made all the way back from Abraham became true. And we get the beauty of having the whole perspective. Right? We might even look at the story of Joseph today and him being able to forgive his brothers, and we might be able to say, well, he had that perspective too. Right? And it's easy to look at God when you have the full perspective. Right? But Joseph didn't have that full perspective at the end of his life. He had a glimmer of it. He had a promise that God said, I'm going to do something, and he held on to that promise to the day that he died. For some of us, as we finish up, we're still trying to figure out how to deal with the guilt in our life. And maybe it hasn't been 44 years like my mom, right? Maybe you're in the middle of it, and you're just like, man, I don't know what God's doing in it. So it's really hard to look at this story when you're living in the middle of this story. But again, Joseph, at the end, he's living in this story, looking ahead to this story, going, no, God actually is going to do something great. And as we end, I want to just end on this. Well, how do I know that? And what does God see when he sees me? What is this hope that I'm holding on to? What is this hope of an unresolved promise? The hope comes from this. It comes from you and I. The reason that we can forgive ourselves is that we are forgiven. Right? That if we've put our faith in Jesus Christ, like when God sees me, he doesn't actually see me and my past. He sees his son. Think about these words. This is Galatians chapter 2, verse 20. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. That means every time you look in the mirror and you see your past, when God sees you, he doesn't see you. He sees his son. Right? Which should then encourage us to do one final thing. Philippians 3:13. He says this. He says, one thing I do, forgetting what lies behind and straining forward to what lies ahead. Right? What do you need to forget today? What do you simply need to say, God, that happened. Maybe it happened to me, right? Joseph certainly had to say that. Maybe it happened because of me. But I got to let that go. And I got to hold on to this future promise that I have of life with you. And I got to hold on to this future promise that my past does not define me, but that I have a future with you. How do we need to define that today? Some of us need to just spell it out. Here's what I'm letting go. Here's what I'm forgetting behind me. And here's what I'm looking forward to. In order for any of that to happen, it took the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And so we're going to take a moment here, and we're going to celebrate communion, and we're going to say, God, when I take this just reminds me that I can forget what happened in the past, and that I can press forward to the future with you. I can press forward to this future promise. And so I'm going to pray. I'm going to give us an opportunity on your own. If you're a believer, get up. We have stations. Take that communion on your own, and we're going to reflect in a song or two here. So would you pray with me? Father God, we thank you for this moment in this story of Joseph, where we get an honest reaction, an honest reflection of his brothers who just feel so guilty for things that they've done 39 years ago. God, Joseph was 17 years old. He is now 56 years old, and his brothers still feel guilty. God, for any friends in the room right now who are carrying unresolved guilt, God, would they just be honest with you today and recognize, like, hey, if I confess to you that you are Lord, that you see me not in my old stains, but in my future self, in that self being the image of Jesus Christ. God, thank you that we don't have to walk in past shame. God, thank you that even in the midst of not being able to see the full story, just like Joseph, who went to the grave, not seeing the whole story like Hebrews 11 tells us, but holding on to a future promise, God, I pray that some of us today can hold on to that future promise, that you are doing a great work. God, and that despite me and in me and through me, you are doing a great work. God, I thank you for that promise, and we're going to hold on to it, and we're going to remember you here. We pray this in your powerful name, Jesus. Amen. Love you guys.